Hi, this is Dan Behringer back with you once again to finish off our series on the Introduction to Agile, in which we're going to talk about Agile planning. Now, some of you may be thinking, oh my goodness, what is he talking about? Agile planning sounds like an oxymoron, like military intelligence. Well, in Agile, planning occurs just like with project management, but for different reasons and for different outcomes. Yes, there is always some level of planning involved. As long as we have management who are asking the question, what are we going to get? When are we going to get it? And how much it's going to cost, which you get whether you're running Agile or traditional project approaches, delivery approaches, I should say, then we're going to have to do some level of planning to get those answers. Just by way of a quick review, a couple of slides here. We've talked about what's the big deal with Agile, kind of introduced the whole idea of Agile conceptually, maybe even theoretically is the best way to say that. We also discussed the Agile mindset, core values and principles. Then we went into the Scrum, which is the primary delivery kind of organization within Agile concepts. Next, we went into some roles in the Agile environment, both for Agile as well as Discipline Agile. And lastly here, of course, we're going to talk about Agile planning. Also, by way of review, let's go back and look at plan-driven versus adaptive planning. And when I say plan-driven, that means the same thing as traditional waterfall. Also the term predictive, which is a term that we generally try to stay away from at this point by being predictive. In other words, we're driving the work and the delivery of value in the project by following a plan versus adapting to following priorities as we learn more as we go. It's two different focuses, two different primary means of approach. And that is because in situations, project situations specifically, we have different levels of experience, and also the domain that we're trying to solve has different aspects of uniqueness associated with it. We love to say at Projects by Design that uniqueness is the whole point. If things aren't unique, then you don't need to do a project. Why would you bother? Because uniqueness is inherent with the definition of a project. And that is, if your project tends more towards routine, you have more experience, it's not nearly as unique, but you decide to projectize, plan-driven approach is oftentimes an appropriate approach to deliver that project because you can drive your plan with a lot of certainty. The reason why plan-driven works is because we can answer the questions or the uncertainties so that we lower our risk to say, let's just follow these steps and we'll be good to go. However, the more chaotic, more the situation tends towards chaos, then we have to follow an adaptive approach. What are we adapting to? We're adapting to what we've learned. We deliver, inspect, look at what we inspected and adjust based on priority, based upon solution, and so on and so forth. This may seem a little bit inefficient in a lot of respects, but it ends up being much more effective to get something of value delivered. Speaking of value delivery, a couple other quick slides here that I want to talk about. First is the project operating environment. When we look at the project operating environment, projects exist within an organizational context. And that starts with this whole idea that senior management, through strategy, business direction, and so on and so forth, they're going to set goals and objectives for the organization. This could be for a period, or it could be across periods, a 1-year horizon, 3-year horizon, 5-year horizon, or whatever the case may be. They also approve organizational resources in order to deliver against those goals and objectives. In other words, they set funding, they set people, skill sets, and so on and so forth. Now, when we're talking about delivering within this environment, there's a portfolio either conceptually, a portfolio exists, or you even have an organization that runs your portfolio for you. The primary function of the portfolio is to drive the priorities against those resources so that the resources can deliver against the objectives and goals of management. So that's the primary thing. And of course, there's a lot that goes into that. I've oversimplified, if you will, especially for those of you that are portfolio managers. But essentially, that's organizationally the service that provides. Now, when the portfolio provides that service, it may choose to projectize certain components of the work, but also they have operational or organization resources that are sustaining what's being delivered as well. So what we call operations, projects versus operations. In addition, if we have projects that are naturally related to each other, then we will put in a program that harmonizes projects together to deliver against a larger picture, a lot of dependencies between projects and so on and so forth. Now, within this organization, generally speaking, there are two functions that may sit outside the portfolio. Those two functions are experiments and research and business development. When you are looking at new products, you want that kind of to establish whether or not there's a market and all those sorts of things, not necessarily within the portfolio. If they come up with something that is available to the market or going to be consumed, then it would enter into the portfolio because it would have become an initiative of senior management at that point in time. Likewise, business development, we want to go purchase an asset. If the decision is made to purchase it, then it becomes one of the initiatives and it enters into the portfolio. But as they're kind of percolating, they are probably percolating outside of the portfolio, as it were. Now, also within the project operating environment, we need to look at how projects work against the value stream. We describe the value stream as anything that delivers value to the customer. This is just a very simplistic way of looking at value stream. We have product, we have sales associated with that product. We want to be able to capture the orders, process the payment, and then fulfill the order from our distribution centers and so on and so forth. Distribution network, as it were. That is the value stream. We're delivering value to our customers. Every organization does this at some degree. There's some level of sophistication. This is probably an oversimplified view of it, just for the illustration of kind of sharing this conceptually. Once we've delivered value, then it becomes the goal of the organization to optimize the value or increase the return to the organization, the return on investment, as it were, if you want to look at it that way. That is what we call value realization. Value realization is optimizing or increasing the return. So the organization is primarily focused on these two things: delivering value to the customer and making the company, I should say, more effective by generating a higher return on what we're doing. As we deliver this, there's all kinds of different methods and practices that could be employed. Some of these include things like Lean and Agile and DevOps and ITIL, if you're in the IT world, for DevOps and ITIL and so on and so forth. Lean manufacturing and ways to deliver value more effectively and optimize by becoming more efficient at what we're delivering for value realization. Let's say, for example, though, in this value stream, we come across an opportunity that if we try to simply handle it through our regular processes, it would become so disruptive that it would erode the value that we're currently delivering and also erode our return. That is when we want to projectize. We projectize because of disruption, because of the uniqueness and the fact that we haven't experienced as much. and therefore we're going to call that a project. In other words, we're going to take resources from the value stream and we're going to apply project management to that effort in order to better deliver in a way that can insert the project products back into the value stream so our customers can get value and realize that value over time. And what's interesting about this kind of concept is that we as project managers should be focused on the value stream, not from the standpoint necessarily that we're trying to optimize the value stream, but we want to be able to make sure the value that is envisioned is delivered, but also transitioned back into the value stream in a way that it minimizes the disruption. Because the whole point was to kind of separate and build a separate organization within the organization in order to deliver that value because of the disruption. So if our project becomes disruptive when we try to enter it back into the value stream, we really haven't done our job as project managers, as it were. And we have all kinds of different practices we can employ here. Plan-driven, as we talked about, iterative, incremental, and we can also use agile approaches as well, or agile practices, but in a projectized way. Now, I am a shameless project manager, always have been, and I plan to always be. So my interest and the interest of the Project Management Institute, I would imagine, I don't necessarily want to speak for them, but where does this all fit within the project context? Because these practices work very well within all kinds of different operations sorts of things. We're just going to leverage them as we deliver our projects. And by the way, what's the one that's missing here? That is Disciplined Agile. Disciplined Agile is the one set of methods and practices that addresses everything within the value stream. That's why I'm so excited about Disciplined Agile, because it takes into full account the fact that we deliver sometimes in a projectized way, but we don't necessarily have to. And here are some good ways to come up with the decisions about what various practices we will choose from in order to deliver effectively and efficiently, no matter where we fit within this value stream. So let's get back to project management then. And as we know, as project managers, we're primarily focused on scope, schedule, and cost. Management is wanting to know what we're going to get, when we're going to get it, and how much it's going to cost. So I'm going to be focusing on talking about what happens within that project box, not what happens within the organization and the whole value stream, but if we decide to projectize. Let's just focus on that. So in scope planning, in a plan-driven approach, it starts with a project charter, and it leads us to what we call a work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure is when we drive what are the decomposition of items into what we call work packages, which is synonymous with a deliverable. Each deliverable is owned according to assignment and by the impact of that deliverable on an organizational unit. The project manager is going to facilitate the work breakdown structure, and it will result in a scope baseline. That scope baseline is essentially the hierarchical composition of the work and the work breakdown structure associated with acceptance criteria, what's in, what's out, and it's all based upon a good understanding of requirements before we set that baseline, because we want to measure our performance against the baseline going forward. In other words, check, check, check. Did we deliver everything that we described up front? That's our focus in a plan-driven approach. In an agile or adaptive approach, the charter is essentially a set of people getting together to describe what it is that we want to ship to the customer. In other words, the focus is on shippable product. This finds its way all the way through from the high level all the way down to the lowest level, which is the user story within our scope. That is the same, it is equivalent of the requirement, as it were, in the plan-driven approach. We want to be able to create this sense of what is it people can use, something they can use. Now, we oftentimes describe that with a couple of terms like minimum viable product or minimum business increment. They don't mean the same thing. Minimum viable product is what all do we have to deliver so for that portion of the solution to hang together and be usable, something that can be usable. In other words, something that we can generate value from. MBI is oftentimes associated with when we're trying to make incremental value delivery. We have something essentially relatively stable. I know I may create some argument by saying that, but bite-sized chunks that there's an increment of value so that we get our thought around what is it we want to organize in terms of priority, because we want those stories to be in business priority. Well, sometimes we need some help in organizing that. It's a way of kind of decomposition, if you will. Another term that's used oftentimes is features. The features are described as what is it that we want the system at a high level to perform. What we'll do then is we'll lay that out, or the product owner is going to lay that out in a product vision or roadmap. And one of the differences is the team owns the deliverables. The team owns the delivery of these things as opposed to making an assignment against the ownership of deliverable. And as I mentioned, the product owner is going to facilitate this, and it results in a framework on what or when value will be delivered to the customer. Next, schedule planning. It starts with the work breakdown structure. That work breakdown structure, which is the reflection of our scope baseline, is going to drive us to a set of activities, an activity list. The decomposition of work packages into activities allows us to assign duration and resources to each individual activity. We then validate that by the work package owner, our QA processes, and just as the project manager facilitates the WBS, is also facilitating what actually is going to be done in order to deliver. This is going to result in a schedule network diagram that shows dependencies, resources, start date, finish date, all of these things that we can drive the plan with, plan-driven approach. For Agile Adaptive, this is where it gets a little bit different, right? This is where that idea is to continue thinking in terms of shippable product, and we may simply estimate the number of sprints that is necessary to complete the product vision or roadmap. Now, as we go through that, we also are going to set releases. Releases are dates in which we now have a prediction of when things will be available to be delivered. Now, when I say prediction, that is a harsh word to someone who's a pure agilist. But generally speaking, management wants to know what are we going to get and when are we going to get it. So until management stops asking that question, then Agile will not require any planning. But as long as management is asking that question, we're going to have to give some sort of prediction, but it's a different prediction than plan-driven. It's a prediction of, or a forecasting of when we have something usable by the customer or value that has been delivered, that they can take benefit from. In plan-driven, we generally don't expect the customer to take benefit from what we've delivered until the end of the project. In Agile, we expect the customer to start being able to take benefit, or in other words, start realizing the value and optimizing that value at various points within the project where there is a release. Each sprint delivers as many story points as practical. That's called our velocity. It's the complexity of the story, and it will result in an estimated number of sprints and release dates associated. For cost planning, for plan-driven, we take the resources and material costs and we assign those, as we mentioned, to each activity, which, because each activity has a start and finish date, allows us to show spend over time. So we're going to aggregate all of this up through our work breakdown structure, people and materials, which allows us to produce a time-phased spend curve, and that's going to forecast funding requirements. So the organization knows by period what we're expecting to have funded so we can deliver the project scope. The range of estimates is described as a plus or minus of spend for the project or period. Lastly, we're going to add contingency reserves to create our cost baseline from which we're going to measure our performance going forward. With Agile Adaptive, as I mentioned, we're going to take those people and resources and we're simply going to assign them to sprints. The people are the calculation of people resources are based on the team and sprint assignment. Who do you have per sprint? And if we need to purchase materials, those are point-in-time purchases that we can show at various points within the sprint cycles. All of this can be aggregated into a cost tracking workbook, which shows costs by period because the sprints have finish and start dates. So this has also been referred to as burn rate estimating. By burn rate estimating, we mean that we're going to forecast by sprint what we think the cost of each sprint will be, and that will be how much of our budget we will burn to run that sprint. Our range of estimates can then be plus or minus number of sprints, as it were. So some of this is very well documented and established in terms of practices. Some of this is a little bit less documented or less accepted, if you will, because of the fact that in Agile, there's a tendency to react when we say, let's do an estimate, right? Because to them, it sounds like, oh, well, someone's trying to be predictive or have a plan-driven approach. Not the case. As I mentioned, management still has those three questions. This is a way that we can help provide management those questions because in a pure form, Agile is primarily concerned with the Scrum. But as project managers, when we take our work out of the value stream in order to deliver it within the project context, that's where we step in. And we can provide the value of what we're going to get, when we're going to get it, how much it's going to cost, our three scope, cost, and schedule, the triple constraints, regardless of the method or practice or approach, whatever you want to call it, that we're delivering. All right. So if you want to know more, you're more than welcome to follow us at Projects by Design. We are at projectsbydesign.net. We're on YouTube. We also have a Facebook and, of course, LinkedIn. Just look up Projects by Design in any one of those areas and you should see our logo. Click on that. Follow us there. Check out our projectsbydesign.net courses page. You can take Discipline Agile courses. You can take your PMP exam prep courses. All of those are available. Give us a note, contact at projectsbydesign.net. Call us 843-480-0388. We'd love to help you build your capabilities as a project manager. Let us know, and we'd love to be in relationship with you. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this series, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.